Hello and welcome to my instructional chess video. Today we'll be going over the basics of chess, and I know it's not probably the most interesting topic that I could have chosen, but I'm passionate about it and I like it, so I'm going to talk about it. Let's start with how the pieces move. And just to clarify, for the future, most chess pieces cannot move past other pieces, whether they're your own or your opponent's. And these pieces include the rook, bishop, king, queen, and the pawn to an extent. Let's start with the most powerful, the queen. The queen can move infinitely in every direction, laterally, diagonally, and horizontally, making it the strongest piece on the chessboard, and worth 9 points. You won't want to lose a queen without a very good reason. The squares that the queen can move to are highlighted red, and if an opponent's piece is in those red squares, the queen can capture it, removing the other piece from the board and taking the opposing piece's spot. The easiest to learn, in my opinion, is the rook, which can move in every square horizontally or vertically, and captures in the same directions. This is the second most powerful piece, and is stronger in the later stages of the game. Next up are the bishops, and they can move in any direction diagonally, and are worth 3 points. And also worth 3 points are knights, and they're the most annoying chess piece because they move very weirdly. They move in an L shape, two squares up and one over on either side. And you can do that in any direction. So you can move 2 squares down and then one to the left or right, 2 squares left or right, and then one up and down. Next is the weakest, but also the strongest piece, which would be the pawn. And I say that because the pawn has a special ability that I'll get to later. But for now, the pawn can only move 1 square up or 2 squares if it's their first move. And the pawn is incapable of moving backwards. The pawn does capture diagonally, but if you're able to get the pawn to the very end of the board, you can make or promote it to any piece that you want, usually promoting the queens and only promoting the knights, bishops, and rooks in very specific situations, normally to avoid a draw. But lastly, certainly not least, would be the king. The king can move 1 square in any direction, and if the king is captured or put in checkmate, you lose the game. There are 2 special moves in chess. One belongs to the pawn, and the other to the rook. I'll cover these later.
Now, how to set up the chessboard. This is surprisingly simple, and it's not that hard. All you need to know is that in the bottom right corner, there has to be a white square on both sides. The pieces are on the edge of the board from left to right are set up as follows. Rook, knight, bishop, king/queen, bishop, knight, rook. The queen always goes on her color, and the king is always next to her. Chess has one main objective, keeping your king safe from danger. If your king comes in view of an enemy piece, this is called a check. When your king is in check, you must either move your king, block with another piece, or capture the piece checking your king. You cannot move your king or other pieces, which would result in having your king in check, resulting the capture of your king and the end of the game. To win, you must put the opposing king in what's called checkmate, where the king cannot move, block, or capture without still being in check. I'm going to show you some examples, and you're going to tell me whether the black king is in checkmate or not. I'll give you around 5 seconds. Now let's talk about some basic tactics. And before you stop paying attention, bear with me here. This knight in the middle controls 8 squares in total, while this knight in the corner only controls 2. This bishop in the middle controls 13 squares, while this one in the corner only sees 7. This means that pieces in the center of the board are much more powerful than when they are not. In the beginning of the game, you want to get your knights and your bishops out as soon as possible. You can do this by playing pawn to e4 as white first. This allows you to develop your white square bishop towards the middle. You also want to have at least one pawn in the middle of the board on either of the squares e4, d4, e5, and d5. This allows safe development of your bishops and knights towards the center. Using the strategy of developing your pieces towards the center, you may reach an Italian game, which looks like this. In this position, you can play a neat little move which is called castling. To castle, you must move your king 2 squares towards the rook you want to castle with, and then put the rook on the other side of the king. You may castle whenever there are no pieces in between either rook, and you cannot castle while in check or going through check. The reason for castling is to get your king in a safer position away from the middle of the board where all the fighting is going to happen, and you normally want to do this as early in the game as possible. Thank you for hopefully listening, and goodbye.